Okay, everyone. Hello. We're going to go ahead and get started. And this is one of our breakout sessions for the Education Initiative. And my name is Tisha Thomas. I'm one of the advisory committees for the Northeast Ohio Black Coalition. And everybody had a story, but I got to tell you how I met Bianca. We were both at Texas Southern University at our graduation ceremony, and she was sitting next to me. And I said, "Where are you from?" She said, "Cleveland." I said, "I'm from Euclid." I said, "I went through this whole program by myself." And she said, "I guess so." And from there, we became friends, and when she had this vision, she called upon me, and that's why I got here. So wherever you are, and she's in your presence, you're probably going to be part of her team somewhere in the future. So I'm here to actually announce one of our moderators, Reverend John H. McCants, Jr., and he's going to go ahead and present introduce our presenters. Thank you.
I'm going to be very, very brief. I thought it was only in the church. In my tradition, we have always a system where there is a presenter to produce the presenter, or to present the presenter. I am not going to waste valuable time. On page 12, you will see 4 names of our 4 presenters. I may project a little bit more than someone else, but this mic is very, very loud. Our first presenter will be Mr. Kenneth Bell, and he will be followed by David James. All right, if you will come to us, if the first one will come, and then we will follow the order printed in the book. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I have extra pressure on me this morning because Mrs. Thomas didn't share with you. She's one of my board members in Euclid. And so, it puts a little extra pressure on the superintendent. But I'm very, very happy. Very, very happy to be here. Very happy to present. I have a lot to present, so I'm going to go through it very quickly. But I do have to just tell you just a couple of stories. I could resonate with a lot of what I heard this morning. When Dr. Williams was talking about Charity Hospital, I had to go to him and tell him that I was born in Charity Hospital in New Orleans. And the reason that I was born in Charity Hospital in New Orleans has to do with what we were talking about this morning. My parents both went to Southern University, and when they were coming back from in the South, at that particular point in time, there was only certain places that you could have black children could have be delivered at a hospital. Charity happened to be one of those hospitals. So I had an opportunity to connect with Charity Hospital in Louisiana in that way. So that really resonated with me. My experience comes from Columbus. I was assistant superintendent in Columbus before I came to Euclid. And while I was in Columbus, a couple of things that were first for me. When I coached basketball, I was a head basketball coached for 14 years. And again, some of the stories that you heard this morning, one of the things that happened to me, I just have to give you this experience. Because in the OCC in Columbus, it was a suburban school district, I was the only black coach. To tell you what you have to go through as a black male in that situation. My first game as a coach, I'm sitting on the bench and I'm in the middle and my assistants on both sides of me. The referee comes up and he looks at all 3 of us sitting on the bench and he says, "Coach, can I have your captains?" And the guy says, "Well, no, I'm not the head coach." Looked me right in the eye and went to the next guy and said, "Coach, can I have your captain?" I said, "Well, I'm not the head coach." And then he looked at me and I looked at him, and here's where you have to make a decision. Because I know what I could have said. I know how I wanted to act. But I looked at him and I said, "Well, I just guess you ran out of choices." And I am the head coach. And so that's how it started for me. And so I share that with you to tell you that when I'm asked, and I'm asked often about why there aren't more people that look like David and I as far as superintendents, I tell people all the time, it has to do with how you react to those kinds of situations. I mean, you can choose to react one way, or you choose to react the other. And what happens when you know of all of the injustices and you know all the things that are wrong, when that happens, there's a tendency to want to act in a different way. I chose not to. and as a result, able to do what I do today. So I just wanted to start with that because a lot of what I heard this morning resonates into what I'm going to be talking about very quickly, because I have as has been pointed out, I have 143 slides. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of why it's important and why it's healthy to have a public education system. And this is part of the presentation that I made at Ohio State with the African American Studies group there. We're talking about why in a democratic society, looking at today, why it's important. But I want to give you a little bit of context before I start. First of all, our students, and this is impacting our students today. They go on to two paths. We tell them as superintendents, as teachers, you know, I taught marketing, and we tell them that if you do what you need to do, you can be successful. We talk about what we call generational advancement. And again, I'm going to go quickly because I think a lot of it's been covered in some of the other areas and things that you need to do. That if you work hard, then what happens is you will be able to then give that opportunity to your children. They should be able to prosper all of that. We give them that American dream. But what has been happening is an inequality, and I want to give you a little bit of context. What I'm telling you doesn't really resonate unless you can see the data. Here is an example, if you look on the screen, an example of what's happening currently in the environment of the students that come into contact with us. If you look at this, what it's telling us is that the lowest 20% has decreased, while at the top there's been an increase. So those individuals who aren't making a lot of money are making less money, and those individuals at the top are making more. Now, why is that important? Our children hear this, and they come in, and we have to be able to look at trying to present opportunities for them. But that's just one of the dynamics that they deal with. The other thing that we need to see is where we relate to the rest of the world. What you see on the screen there is that we are one of the most qualitative nations around. And when you look at how we compare across the country, you can see that when you look at the nations across the world, where the United States lands. This is the environment that our children are coming in today, and you look at that within the African American community, and it's even higher. So for people of color, as you've heard today, for people of color, students of color, there has been a disharmony. And so what's happening here is we look at income, and we look at what the heads of household. You heard, and I wrote the stat down, 80% of the single households are African American households. When you look at those families, and Dr. James is going to talk about discipline, but I had to add to this. When I look at one of the things you do as a superintendent is you make decisions on expulsion hearings and all those kinds of things. 95% of the expulsion hearings that I hear and see when parents come in are women and mothers. Very, very seldom. I was telling my people yesterday, very seldom are fathers there. And so that percentage that was represented this morning is true, because very, very seldom you see that. But it gives you an idea of where the income levels are. These are the stats that our children see when they come into our school buildings. These are the kinds of stats that they see and where they are. And as we look at what we've talked about today, about the importance of education, why education is so important. Again, I'm going to go quickly because I have a lot of stats. So what's the implication for education? Why do I give you all of this? So I want to make sure I paint a picture as to what kind of environment our students are stepping into, and what kind of environment we have as educators to make sure that they're aware of, but tell them how and show them how and give them the skills and tools necessary for them to be able to move on. So it does have implications for us as educators. So it's not wages, it's not just wages, but let's look at mobility. This particular stat I think is very interesting because what it talks about is it talks about intergenerational mobility was increasing. And what that is, intergenerational mobility, is the ability of one generation to pass wealth on to another. And so when you look at the stats and you look at earning, elasticity, and how that looks, what does that look like? What's the ability for you to be able to get an education? For me, I just had a son 2 weeks ago graduate from University of Cincinnati, my second. Both of them have their degrees. I wanted to make sure they had their degrees so they could at least come to the table. But the ability of families to be able to do that. What's the ability for them to be able to do that? So I want to give you an example of what this looks like. So if you look at this particular graph, the smaller the number, the less the opportunity. So if you look at 1950, or more the opportunity, look at 1950, there was a 0.04 gap, and if you look at 2000, that gap has sharply increased. So the higher the number, the less the opportunity for the intergenerational mobility to occur. So what that means is less of an opportunity for one family to be able to pass on their income, their wealth, their knowledge onto the next generation, and that's decreasing over time. So now what is happening as a result of that, instead of being a land of opportunity, now we have one of the lowest rates of intergenerational mobility. Again, the ability to be able to transfer over those skills necessary to be successful has decreased. So what does this do for us, for educators? And how does this impact us for educators? So a better, fair education is the only answer and the only way our students figure out. I tell our kids all the time that without an education, you can't get to the table. You can't, there's nothing that you're going to be able to do. You don't have a shot. You have to be able to get, you have to have your education. So let's look at what we're doing currently. So how are we doing in schools? Just to give you a little bit of data on how schools are looking across the country. So since 1999, just to give you an idea, a little context, we've had some growth, and this is the NAEP reading scores, and you can see the red is the African American, Latino is the yellow, and blue are the white students, and you can see that there's been some gain for 9-year-olds. Again, I'm going to go quickly. 1999, this is math and how we're doing across the country. So when you look at all groups, they've improved since 1990. This is 4th grade. And then when you look from 1996, where we were in 1996, you can see, and if you look at this particular data, what you want to try to do is you want to shrink the orange area and increase the top 2 areas. That's the goal in what you want to do in those areas. And you can see in 2011 that we were able to do that in the elementary level. So when you look at it by race, African American, Latino, and white, where we are, we've made some increases at that level. So we have more students, summary there is that we have more students that are performing at a higher level than we did in 1996. So we're trending in the right direction. We're doing some of the things that we need to do. There's obviously been some growth and some things that we're doing well there. So let's look at middle school. What's happening in middle school very quickly. Our students of color, 13-year-olds in reading, as you can see, kind of the same trend as we go up. And I apologize for going quickly, but I just want to try to get through as much as I can. We've improved over time. So what's the point? If we focus, and Dr. James will talk about this too, if we focus and do what we need to do as educators, we can make a difference in some of the areas, but we have to focus and we have to be able to work together in a collaborative as stakeholders to be able to make that happen. And we made traction in elementary. We've got students in elementary and middle that are not quite as much behind, but we need to become, we've got to make education the democratic equalizer for all of our students. They can talk about where you come from, they can talk about who you are, who you know and all that, but they can't do anything if you have an education, and that's what we really want to make sure our kids understand. So let's talk about high school, since that's the group that is usually the flagship and where you get most of the information as far as, or the perceptions of success at high school, and you'll find it pretty interesting. In reading for high school students currently, the reading level over the last few years has been pretty flat. Math achievement has been flat for high schools. And the gaps have not increased or have not narrowed since the 80s and 90s. And I saw it firsthand, and I have to share this quickly. I saw it firsthand because I took students to Beijing, China in 2007, sat in a classroom where juniors, kids in the classroom, junior students were taking English classes, math classes, all of the English courses. And 2 of the juniors in there, I sat next to them and I asked them, I said, so tell me what you want to do. What is it that you want to do? And the 2 girls told me, they said, well, we want to go to UCLA, we want to go to Stanford, we want to go to these high institutions in the United States. And I said, so tell me how you did on the ACT. And these are juniors in China, Beijing, China. I said, so tell me how you did on the ACT. Well, the girl said, well, I'm kind of embarrassed, I don't really want to tell you because I didn't do very well. So just tell me what you did. Perfect score on the ACT is 36. One of the girls had a 32, the other one had a 34, it wasn't good enough. And so when I came back to the States, I told our students, I said, while you're messing around here thinking that you can just be average, understand that kids across the water are looking to take your positions. And if you look at them, working to finish up a Ph.D. at Ohio State, one of the studies that was done at Ohio State, are the number of students that they admit from foreign countries into Ohio State that knock our students out of first-year admissions. Many of them have to go to the other institutions. They can't go to the main campus. They've got to go to the auxiliary institutions because students from outside of the states are knocking them out of those positions. They only have so many. And the median score to get into Ohio State now, median score, is a 26 on the ACT. So they don't even look at you unless you have a 26 on the ACT. So, I asked the question. I happened to be at a meeting with Gordon Gee, and he and I were sitting together. I said, "No, Dr. Gee, you can't tell me that everybody on that football team has a 26 on the ACT." Because I know they don't. So they make exceptions. But the bottom line is for students, it makes it very, very difficult. So that gap hasn't narrowed since the late 80s. So let me just give you an idea and read it very quickly. Same kind of graph. Not much in math. So what do our students look like? And I just kind of gave you the example of what they look like compared to other countries. We rank 12th in literacy. And again, this is from the PISA studies that have been done. We rank, when you look at science, where we are, and this is a country, we're the United States country where we were at the top of our game, and this is where we are now. Of the 34 countries that have been that are in the study, 25th in math. So where do we rank the highest? Inequality. That's where the United States ranks the highest, and that's what we have to deal with as educators every day. We're the fourth largest. The USA is the fourth largest gap with supplemental educational services. That's what SES stands for, low and high students in the world. And when you look at the gap between the highest and the lowest, the United States has the fifth largest gap in the world. And you think about all of the other countries and what we deal with. So here's the issue, that this all happens before they even come to school. And I share this with our people in our community, that a lot of what we deal with before they even get to our buildings and what that looks like. So here's the educational component, the implications for us in education. So we give students that arrive with less, in some cases, less. Unless we as superintendents advocate to not let that occur, which we do. So how do we do it? By who gets what to whom. So let me give you an example. Look at the example on the screen. Students in poor schools receive A's for work that would be C's in affluent schools. I can give you a perfect example in my own household, because my wife is a valedictorian and struggled in college her first year, partly because of the fact that the expectations were completely different than what she thought. So when you look at that, that does happen. And so we have to prevent that. We've got to make sure we do that. Also by who teaches who. And when you look at that, you can look at that and that the ability of being able to be placed in a course. I can remember just another quick example. Student was a special education student, did not have support at home. My counselors did not want to place him in this upper level math course. I was the principal. I said, you will put him in the course, put him in the course. Special education student in the math course gets a 36 on the ACT. Now what would have happened had I not allowed that to happen, he would have gone into a regular math course. We would have never known that he had this particular skill. And I remember calling him down to my office, and I called him down, I sat him in the chair here, and I said, hey, Gene, I need to talk to you. He said, Mr. Bill, I didn't do it. And I said, yes, you did. He said, no, I didn't do it. And he said, you can't prove it. And I said, yes, I can. And I gave him the test score. And he had 36 on the ACT. So the point being that being able to have the gatekeeping ability of our educational system to lock kids out of certain courses then eliminates their opportunity to be successful. We have to prevent that. Another quick example of higher level course offerings that sometimes don't exist. Another example of less likely to, in most cases, again, not all, but in cases to be able to have those higher level math courses. And then we look at, again, I apologize for going quickly, but I want to save time for the other presenters, about who teaches who courses. So what this is telling, this graph here is telling you that a novice teacher is a first year or an inexperienced teacher. You're in the ability or the percentage of how those teachers are deployed in school district. So what it's telling you that in a low minority school, 13% would be novice teachers, or what we consider novice teachers. In a high minority school, 22%. So you have less experienced teachers teaching in those high minority schools. Math courses, again, same kind of graph, same type of, you look at poverty, you look at minority, you look at the higher level of teachers that are not experienced. These are just some examples in other places, and I won't get into all that. So these results are pretty tough for us, and it remains through 12th grade. This is the example, and this is in 2009, and for data for the ability to graduate in high school. This is where we were. For African American, it was 64%. So when you look at that, and it translates into what happens when they get to college, our rates look completely different. So you look at this, and you look at this particular data again. Think of this on the context of this is what our kids walk into every day. This is what they hear. This is what is out there. This is the noise that they hear, and their ability to be able to do that. That's why it was extremely important. And my son, who graduated from Cincinnati, had to go through some tough love with his dad to be able to get to that degree, but he was getting that degree because I wanted to make sure he understood that you can't get to the table. And part of it is the reason here is that I knew if he stopped, he would never complete that. And his ability to be able to do that is going to be important. But it gives you some data there. So what happens to our kids after they leave high school when they get to college? What does it look like? So here's the graduation rates for, again, the 64%. And then you look at the, let me go back to this. So when you look at this particular slide here, it gives you the example of where students are, African American students are, where students are, and their ability to graduate, and how we need to, as educators, make sure that we're getting them where they need to be and continuing to move that needle for them. And then what I want to do is try to compare what they look like when they get to college. So this particular slide here talks about the ability of families to be able to afford them to be able to get degrees. And again, this is what kids are walking into and what they see. And what it's telling us here is that from a high income family, they're 7 times likely to be able to get that degree as compared to or not get that degree as compared to a low income family. 7 times difference. And then the point behind all of it is that this then threatens the health. What we talk about the physical health, but this also impacts our educational health and our democracy because it presents an unequal system. And even for those who don't really care about education, if you don't, then what happens, you end up having to support these individuals who can't take care of themselves. And this particular slide, I'm not going to get into all of these, it just gives you different patterns. I want to get into what we can do, because I think that's the important piece here. So what is it that we need to do about all this? These are all the things that you hear. I hear it all the time. All of these. And I'm probably sure some of you can add some to this. These are all the different kinds of excuses that you hear about why our kids can't learn, students of color can't learn. And here are some examples. Again, I've got our data in here, but I'm not going to get into all that. I have some examples of schools that have performed and performed well and done some things extremely well. So many examples there, and I'm not going to get into all those. So there are a lot of things that we can do. And again, different kinds of examples of how we as educators can do some things differently. These are some of the things that are just some of the data, but I want to get into, we can learn from all of those statistics that I just went through very quickly, all of those high attaining schools. What we have to do as educators is learn. I mean, I've gotten information from Akron, from different places. We have to continue to go out and look at how we can obtain information to be able to help our students so that we can then be able to give them what they need so they can be successful. So we've got all of these high performing districts. Attack the low expectations headed on by leveraging the Common Core. I tell our folks all the time, we can get our students to rise to low expectations if that's what we choose. And we can make them extremely low and everybody can rise to them, or we can get them to rise to high expectations. And so what we have to do is to continue to look at that and manage that. Now, one of the things that I do is I'm a part of the state committee on assessment. And if you all know with Park and all the things that are going on with testing and all that, a lot of disarray in that area. I can't really tell you what's happening next other than the fact that I don't know what's happening next, and I'm on part of the committee that is making recommendations to the legislatures regarding what we need to do. One of the things that we found out was that you can't test kids all year long. You can't do that. And the effectiveness of that impacts urban school districts much more. It's much more difficult for us than it is for those districts that have the wherewithal to be able to make the change. I use the example when I talk to our representative, I use the example of trying to turn the Titanic. When you look at trying to turn something in an urban school and make a difference and a change in what you do, it makes it very difficult. So we've got to attack that and be able to advocate, which is what I heard this morning on these issues, to make sure we do that. I referenced the point of low expectations, and I gave you the examples of the A's and the C's and the ability of what will work in a fluent school and what works in what would be considered a school of poverty. And then, if I had time, I'd give you this writing assignment that when you look at the difference between a writing assignment, a 10th grade writing assignment in an affluent school and an urban school, and the difference between that, the two scenarios, I mean, it would open your eyes to what the inequities actually look like on paper for our students. One of the things that happens with Park is our kids, a lot of them, need to be able to read the entire passage on an assignment in order for them to be able to then do what they need to do. Because of the electronic way that it's delivered, they can only read a portion of the passage. So when they want to go back and do that, they have to scroll back and they can't go back and connect. For our kids, that makes a difference. It's a big difference. And so those kinds of things aren't in consideration in some of the decisions that are made about how we then deliver what's going to be their measurement of success. So I'll give you that example. This is the example. And I can send, anybody who wants to have my cards, I'll send you that. You can take a look at what that looks like. The third implication for us is how we then deliver these new standards and making sure our kids understand the importance of them in the classroom, questions for boards of education, things that we need to ask so that we're delivering and doing the things that we need to do policy-wise to make sure things are correct. Then how we measure educators. I'm sure you're all aware of the teacher growth model. In the state of Ohio, teachers are measured 50% on student growth, and there are other indicators of how teachers are measured and their effectiveness and what that looks like. Being able to understand that, you as stakeholders, as parents, understanding what that process looks like, so that you can then go ask some of the right questions at board meetings and with people who are in positions to make decisions. And these are just some of the questions. Again, I have all of this. I can send it to you, but just some of the questions that you want to ask in human resources and different places, so that individuals are really checking to make sure that we're online with the things that we need to have. Community and parents, we got to make sure that we communicate effectively with them. They need to understand the information. You need to get help when you need help. The fifth implication here is that we need to prepare the community for a drop in results. And let me just explain something to you. When you make a change, anytime you make a change, especially in when you have kids who are coming in, I have kids that come in 2, 3, 4 years behind. We get an A in value added. We get at least 2.5 years of growth. It's not even half enough to even get them to where they need to be. And they're measured on the same assessment as everybody else who's at the same finish line. Not an excuse, just a fact. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that at an earlier level, kids come with more of what they need to be successful. So when you then measure those students and you change that assessment, which is what has happened in the state of Ohio over the last 2 or 3 years, and you change that assessment and you make it for kids who are struggling here, and then you make the bar here, then you know they're going to struggle. But when people see the result, it looks as if you don't have growth because now you have a different bar. And so what you have to do then is make sure that people are clear on what those assessments look like, make sure they're clear on what the impact is, and make sure they understand what is happening underneath that. And as educators, we have to prepare the community for that. So that implication for us. I got 60 seconds. So let me see if I can get 6. Utilize the results from the educator evaluation. How many seconds? 45? I'm not going to get into all of this. I'll get to 7. we've got to look at what our strategies look like. And that's the 7th. Again, I can send all of this to you. And then we've got to make sure that we mind the gaps that we have in our process to make sure that we are doing what we need to do with our students and that we're being as effective as we possibly can be. It's not something that can get done by just a superintendent or just a teacher or just a principal. It will take all of us together. It takes the entire village in order to make that happen. Love what I do, but what makes it enjoyable for me is when we can come together and make the gains and do what we need to do on behalf of our kids. And it's about them because it's about their future. So I apologize for rushing, but thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
We want to thank Mr. Bell and ask for Mr. James to come forward. And let me apologize. He did an excellent job. I failed to share with the presenters. Each presenter should take approximately 20 minutes. You did very well, sir.
All right, good afternoon. I'm David James, Superintendent of Akron Public Schools, and I'm actually from Cleveland, went to John Adams, and my parents still live around here. So all the stuff people talk about, what's going on in the community, what's going on in neighborhoods, I've seen probably just about everything. All right, so today I'm here to talk about discipline and discipline disparities in our children of color. So some background. Some of this goes back in recent history to the SAFE, and there was like the Safe and Drug-Free Schools Act in the mid-1990s where the federal government created this policy, and then in order for public schools to get federal funding, because we get federal funding for like Title I and special ed, you had to implement these zero tolerance policies. There were these policies and also extended mandatory jail sentences for things like if you committed a crime with a gun within a certain number of feet of a school or sold a certain amount of narcotics within a certain number of feet of school, you had mandatory sentences. So as that policy and laws filtered down to Ohio, the Ohio legislature in 1998 implemented Ohio zero tolerance policies. So what happened then is that schools began to implement more strict student discipline codes, which included mandatory suspensions and expulsions, which result in more out of school time. And then a more recent ramification of that is the addition of police officers or school resource officers in the schools. And depending on how you manage that, it can be a positive or it can be a negative. And so what we have seen from these policies is the definition of a weapon has been expanded. We can have a pencil that's a weapon. You know, a firearm can be a weapon, eraser can be a whole lot of things, scissors can be a weapon. And then other less serious behaviors moved up on the totem pole under this umbrella of zero tolerance. So if you're insubordinate, you know, you could get an out of school infraction. And then this development of that concept of the school to prison pipeline is where a lot of this came from. It's where lower level behaviors are almost criminalized and we're getting more kids involved in the juvenile detention system, which really doesn't have to happen. And so what we want to look at then is, as these rules and regulations have come into play, we've had researchers look at the data, and this is what some of them has found. This is from the Children's Defense Fund in 2012, that we know economically disadvantaged students are twice as likely to be suspended from school above students who are not. And of course, African American students, particularly in our urban centers, like in our Ohio 8 districts, are 4 times likely to be suspended than white students. Other data, 70% of black males will experience at least one suspension or expulsion while in school. And again, these out of school time punishments are a lot of times they're for non-safety or non-threatening incidents, lower level incidents, again, that are becoming criminalized. And we have this in our work with our juvenile detention center and our juvenile court, we call it our disproportionate minority impact, where there's a disproportionate number of minority, particularly African American males, who are facing discipline. And again, it's subjective. You know, it's a lot of times it's based on what a teacher's perception is of that behavior, and it's usually because you're refusing to comply with some rule or some other disruptive behavior. And on the juvenile detention side, there's over 2 million youth in the US under 18 that are arrested every year. We see that every day. Over 600,000 youth are placed in detention centers. And then 95,000 reside in a higher level security correctional settings on any given day. So in Ohio, when we look at out-of-school suspensions, this is data again from the Children's Defense Fund. The economically disadvantaged students, you can see across the board from years 2003 all the way up through 2011, that there is a very large disparity between students of economic disadvantaged families who are suspended versus those who are not. And the same thing in our urban school districts in Ohio during the same period. When you look at the number of infractions or suspensions per 100 students, we in Akron are probably the worst offenders of that over time. So 97.2 for percentage of black students versus 25.6 of others or white students. The one thing that we looked at our data in Akron, I have 85% of my students who have no discipline at all. No suspensions, no expulsions. 5% of my students are generating the majority of those out-of-school infractions, and I guarantee that the majority of those students are special needs. They're special education students with behavior problems. And so part of it is the supports that we're providing those students, but the other part is classroom management. And so we're trying to provide more tools to our teachers to deal with those students effectively. Through some of the research we've done, I think the key driver, and I think we saw some of that today in the video, and there is a copy of this presentation which will have the references, is really what we call the dangerous black man stereotype. And not being funny, but you know, there was a movie, and the guy, Godfrey Cambridge was the actor, the Watermelon Man. And remember the scene in that movie when he was white and he was running, racing the bus to the bus stop every morning, and no one, they clapped and no one. Then when he turned black and he did that, people are looking and getting out the way, and the one lady said, "Stop that man," and she saw the same man every day and she's clutching her purse. You know, it's that kind of thing, because again, we know that in our history of slavery, our ancestors were cast as these aggressive people in an effort to really put them down and keep them down. And we know that there were laws like in 1700 in Pennsylvania. It was actually William Penn who put that law into place to have African Americans castrated if they attempted to rape a white woman. And in between 1889 and 1918, you know, 2,500 of our ancestors were lynched. And a lot of times it was for, you know, the story of Emmett Till and some of the other ones, you know, for very minor infractions. And so, you know, moving on, you know, through the time I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, and even through today, we look at the media portrayals of African American males in particular, and how is that impacting the way that teachers who aren't African American or who don't reflect their student body, how are they viewed? And so these authors, Carter, Skiba, Arredondo, and Pollock, summed it as these negative and controlling images of the defiant black person developed over hundreds of years of discrimination and oppression remain very pervasive in our society. And these stereotypes and beliefs can have a severe and sometimes deadly consequences, and even more frequently create disruption in the life's chances of many black and brown youth. And so many of us growing up experience the same thing. It's like, how do you relate to the kid that you're dealing with? And that's that whole cultural competency piece. So how do we mitigate that problem? One, again, is that culturally responsive instructional and classroom management strategies. Our teachers really need to be aware of that. And then balancing our zero tolerance policies with the consideration of, in my opinion, it's like the punishment should fit the crime. And then implementing something called positive behavior supports, where we're not really going into this punishment mentality, but we're really trying to get what's the reason behind the behavior, and looking at how we respond to it. So we're a district that uses what's called response to intervention. And so it's really like a pyramid. At the base level of the pyramid, everyone gets the same treatment. And then depending on your actions, we can go into a targeted tier, and maybe we'll get some individual counseling. And then if you have a really bad problem, we put you in the intensive tier, where we provide a lot more services. And that can be both on the academic side, but it can also be on the social emotional side. So again, further areas of mitigation include really aligning our discipline policies so they follow the philosophy of the district and the community at large, and being more helpful to students and their families. And then it's important to have wraparound services, because we've heard earlier today there are a lot of other issues, around health, mental health, nutrition, a whole lot of other things, and schools are just filters for all of the surrounding community. And in order for us to be successful, we have to learn what some of those issues are and try to address them through partnerships. And that's where we pair up with our juvenile court. We have a lot of programs there, which I'll talk about in a minute. With our police, we have officers in our school, but we get to interview them. And I'm telling you, if they take a kid down, they're out. I'm not tolerating that. Child Protective Services, our job and family service departments, our churches, businesses. Actually, we partner with everyone. And no, I'm not related to LeBron James, but he is a partner of ours in the schools. So some of our promising practices, at least in Akron schools, and I know of others, we do have a police in schools program. We have police in our 17 secondary schools. And our whole goal when we met with the mayor and the police chief was to make sure that those officers have positive relationships with the kids, because at the end of the school year, those officers get transferred to other beats in the city, so they know the kids. And it stopped a lot of kids from being shot because they knew the officer. When they said stop, the kid, okay, Officer Moore or Officer Jones, they have great relationships. Again, wraparound services, we have positions that are called linkage coordinators, who will actually visit homes of kids and will match them up with resources in the community. Another one is Judge Linda Teodosio, our juvenile court judge, is very forward-thinking. We have a great partnership with our juvenile court. It's not adversarial at all. I presented at conferences with her. They have a program called The Responder, which deals with undiagnosed mental issues that the responder is trained to be able to evaluate, and then will work with the family and that kid so that kid doesn't end up in front of her bench and getting into further trouble. We have a partnership with the YMCA. They operate one of our alternative programs for kids who come back from the Department of Youth Services, so they get integrated first there before coming into a regular school. We have juvenile detention probation officers there. The juvenile court holds hearings at that building, and then we try to acclimate those kids and work with them first in a smaller group session before they come back into our regular schools. Our teachers work at the Juvenile Detention Center providing educational services for those students or kids who are incarcerated. Mentoring, we're partnering with a group of faith-based and business partners. They received a Community Connectors grant, so our goal for this year is 350 mentors in the schools, which we already have some pilots going on now. So that's very important, is actually because many of the kids and their families may not have someone that they feel comfortable talking to. When I have focus groups with kids, the one thing that stood out from our kids is that don't yell at me when I come in the building with my hood up or earphones in, because you don't know what I had to go through to get here. And then of course, again, that's all around that whole cultural competency piece, and really our job really should be building hope, because we have some real communities where people are in trauma. Then moving forward, I would just suggest that if you can work with your schools or with your principals, if you're a teacher, is flexibility in approach, because one size does not fit all. Every school, and even in our district, every school has a little different culture, and you really have to be responsive to that. I can't really stress how you really have to collaborate. I say collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And then there are some national networks that, like our juvenile court is involved in, and we are too, such as the Models for Change, the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which is involved in that Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative work, the ACLU, NAACP, and a host of other, groups from our PTAs. And our approach to the whole behavior thing is it's not just about like typically it would be in your student services department. I've retooled our athletics department, put in a more strict code of athletic behavior for our athletes, because they're leaders in our buildings and we want to hold them accountable, but not do it in a punishment mentality. I'll give you 2 quick examples of how I feel about discipline. I had 3 elementary kids go to a dollar store, steal those clear plastic orange tip pellet guns, put them in their book bags. Someone got word of it, confiscated them in the bus. One kid was in the cafeteria. And so the school wanted them expelled. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. So did they rob the lunch lady? No. They didn't harm anybody. I don't have any proof that they were going to. And so we had the police officer work with their families. They took the guns back to the store where they stole them, apologized. They got a suspension, but they were back in school. They weren't expelled. Other people wanted me to expel them for a whole year. I'm like, it's not even fair. I shot myself in the hand point blank with it, and the skin didn't break. Another one was where we had a kid who, at a football game, was just really aggressive. The coach should have really intervened and the official should have intervened, but they didn't. Got into a fight in the locker room, tried to get to the other team, pushed past the coach, and the union was upset, and rightly so, but the kid was punished. But then he had a hearing at juvenile court, and that's why it's good to have these relationships. So the judge called me and said, well, these folks are here and they're saying he shouldn't be able to go to his graduation or prom. And I'm like, what in the heck does that have to do with, he served his time, was taken care of through the court, and they're worried, well, there's gonna be a fight. So I'll have 2 officers, my student services staff there to make sure nothing happens. Guess what? Nothing happened. The kid had the right to cross the stage regardless of his behavior, unless he murdered somebody, and he didn't. And so, sometimes we're so stuck on punishing people for something they've done, when if it was our kid, we'd be, raising sand about his rights or her rights and everything. And so if we're gonna be that way with our kids, we should be that way with all of our kids. So that's my 2 cents worth. So thank you.
I believe what we'll do is allow our presenters to say their spiel, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions and answers from each of them, or to each of them at the end. And if Mr. Bragg will come at this point. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a great morning so far. Give me a second to get my PowerPoint pulled up here. 1 second. Obviously, from the title, I will take a look at U.S. educational policy, and I'm going to focus on particularly a black male. And once again, from the title, you can see from my research, the results aren't that good. Today, my purpose of presentation, I'll get into a second, but I also want to look at the past policies, go into America's two educational systems. I want to go to the current state of educational policy in the black male. I want to look at recent policies and more disparities. I also want to offer solutions, and I want to do a conclusion. And I'm going to do it sort of quickly so that you could ask questions as needed. Purpose of my presentation is to, number one, look at a subpopulation, which is the black male, and see what exactly is the impact of these disparities that we've been talking about this morning. One trend that I've noticed so far is that there is a lot of, I don't want to say repetition, but a lot of reinforcement of ideas and findings, and you'll see that in my presentation also. I'm going to start with the past. I want to make a strong emphasis that the current disparities in black males didn't start yesterday. That's something I think a lot of media, a lot of policymakers, they want us to think that the black male being at the lowest of the graduation rates and test rates started yesterday, but this is not true, and I'll get into that in a second, but I also want to look at present, future role of educational policy, and how do we create policies that benefit black males on a national, state, and local level. I chose black males, number one, not because I'm sexist, but because it's the lowest, black males are the lowest performing group in a number of categories: graduation rates, suspension rates, discipline rates, test scores. Black males are the most impacted negatively by educational policy, and also are black males because if we could reach black males, it will have so much impact on some of the other disparities that we heard this morning, such as employment, health, housing, and also incarceration. After emancipation, a war was declared on African Americans. I don't think a lot of people realize this, that as soon as slavery ended, physical bondage ended, a war was declared on us. And this war continues today. Officially after emancipation, America quickly worked to develop two separate and unequal education systems. This is a topic that's not mentioned when we talk about disparities. We had one system for whites and another for everyone else, including Asians, Hispanics, blacks, Native Americans. America has shown us that segregated classroom was the norm. It was what it was to be expected, what was to be used. Education is indoctrination. As soon as a kid is placed in a classroom in its democracy, they're being brainwashed in a good and bad way to be part of this democratic society. So school is a perfect way to promote racism, white privilege, and white supremacy. Also, I noticed the legal battles and social resistance to educational parity that I will get to shortly. Post-emancipation, U.S. educational policy focused once again on segregation, continuing the status quo as we saw in the video this morning, and strengthening Jim Crow. That was the main goal of U.S. educational policy, not to achieve high test scores, not to develop educational parity. It was to keep us separate. Education was used to create a climate of black dehumanization inside and outside the classroom. I say that because in my years of teaching, education does not only happen in the classroom. Education happens in the streets. Education happens on the television screen, movie screen, media, music, etc. And I have a few examples to show how black dehumanization has occurred. Little Black Sambo was a very popular reading book that was used in America's classroom to teach reading. We forgot about this. When we talk about current disparities, we have to realize that generations pass on social capital. So if I had if my grandfather had a bad time in school, that might fall back to my mother, have a bad experience, and to me. So by using Little Black Sambo in class was a way to dehumanize the newly freed black population. Dehumanization in popular culture. Once again, education occurs outside of the classroom also. Birth of a Nation was considered the first great masterpiece in terms of cinema. This was also a movie that President Woodrow Wilson instantly called a classic. If most of America went to see this movie, white America, the images that, if you see this movie, you understand the images and the portrayal of blacks was definitely on a dehumanized level. Popular culture. What about our cartoons the kids watched? The Sambo image, and this was hard because I used to love these cartoons, but Tom and Jerry with the Mamie, Bugs Bunny with the Sambo, so not only in school, but the cartoons, this dehumanized image of a black man was being developed immediately after Emancipation and into Reconstruction. Television, Amos and Andy, blackface, another example of dehumanization. Advertising, nigger boy licorice cigarettes. The Sambo and the Coon image were used as a way to dehumanize from the classroom, television screen, movie screen, grocery store, Maxwell House coffee, gold dust. Another way we were separated were through legal cases. 1847 Virginia Criminal Code, just quickly, was one of the first legal codes where it was written that white people were not to assemble with blacks for the purpose of education, free or post-slavery. So immediately there was a criminal code for that. We had the Roberts case, 14th Amendment, which dealt with due process and equal treatment, and of course Plessy versus Ferguson, and the last two were legal cases, Supreme Court cases that were about integrating blacks into college on an initial level. Now, as I was preparing this presentation, I went and tried to find every Supreme Court case that dealt with desegregation and educational parity. And I found a few dozen. These are some examples. I'm not going to go down the whole list, but we had the original Brown versus Board of Ed, and we had another Brown versus Board of Ed that actually set us back. But as you look down the list, a pattern that I want to point out is that every 2 to 4 years, since Emancipation, there has been some sort of legal Supreme Court decision. Every 2 or 4 years is a pattern, and it stopped in 2003, but we have a recent Supreme Court case dealing with affirmative action on the Michigan campus. So this shows a legal campaign to keep education, or keep segregation going and keep educational parity at its status quo level. Not only legally was there social opposition, but social opposition occurred to educational parity as well. One thing I noticed through my research is that this opposition was well orchestrated. Even before social media, it was well organized. The resistance to segregation, the resistance to, even now, was well organized. We all know about the verbal, physical attacks of black students as they tried to integrate into American schools. We all know about the unequal conditions and facilities that even exist today. This was a way to reinforce inferiority between white and black students, introduce prejudice into our classroom, and also to invoke anger amongst the poor whites and poor blacks that we saw earlier during the video this morning. 1956 Southern Manifesto. It was actually 101 Southern congressmen, senators, and other political figures who signed a letter that saying we would not allow integration in our schools. So that's an example of the political rallying that went on to socially oppose educational parity. KKK, I really don't even need to speak on that. We all know about America's original terrorist group and what they did, but following that, we had decades of de facto and dangerous segregation that still occurs to today, which led to federal mandates of busing. And with busing, we know what happened. White flight, and if you were black and had money, black fight, which worsened the social opposition and made parity even worse. This is also a point that I want to point out, that the psychological effects of all this dehumanization in education. In my research, once busing, white flight, and black flight occurred and it left our inner cities as they look now, this is a point in our community where we stopped, where many of us stopped caring and stopped realizing the importance of education. This is a point, I think, where education is definitely valuable. In prior decades, we expressed that, but this is a point after busing is where many of us start to give up on school and education, which is a sad thing. This brings us to the current. I took this is actually an album cover from an artist named Kendrick Lamar, and if they say a picture says 1,000 words, this is saying about 20,000 words to me. I look at this picture and it's screaming everything I wanted to say about the current state of educational disparities. You have the White House, which for the first time ever, we officially have a black first family within the gates of the most prized real estate in America, the most powerful office in America. But this image also says locked outside that gate are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of black men who, even with the success of Barack Obama and a few other exceptional blacks, are not able to take advantage of this momentum going on. So right now, let's take a look at the current state of affairs. Starting with what are the results of 150 years of educational disparities? Most African Americans, in fact, 54% of African Americans attend urban schools. The other 46% attend rural, suburban, or schools in towns. I do want to acknowledge that there has been recent gains in academic achievement for African Americans, but I asked the question, is it enough? We looked at data presented earlier. The little gains we're making are not, it's not enough. Advanced placement courses, as I said earlier, blacks are not being represented in our higher courses. And even with the people who graduate, the blacks that graduate, are they ready for college? You have to ask, are our high schools even preparing our kids for college in life? So what is the national graduation rate for blacks? Anyone ever looked that up? It sort of makes you sick, doesn't it? I took the 2012-2013 school year. The national graduation rate for black males was 59%. Latino, 65%. White males, 80%. I kept looking at this number for hours, like, okay, 59%. That means if we had 100 black males in this room, only 59 would have the minimum requirement to enter society. And we all know, to be honest, a high school diploma doesn't mean what it used to mean. So only 59 out of 100 could just barely get into the door. And 65% for Latinos is not better, but even the 80% for white males surprised me. So America, if this is our report card for America, white males, in terms of education, America will get a B, Latinos a low D, and definitely an F for black males. Sort of scary when you think about it. I wanted to look at the national, then go down to the state, and then I wanted to take Cleveland Metropolitan School District, since it's our largest Northeast Ohio district. Ohio ranked 41 out of 49 states and the District of Columbia, with only 54% of black males graduated from high school in 2012 and 13. So Ohio was lower than the national. Even more startling, Cleveland Metropolitan School District ranked 44 out of 50 districts with 10,000 plus black male students. 44 out of 50. Only 28% of 14,783 black male students graduated from the 2011 and 2012 cohort. I did the math, that was 4,139 black males graduated out of 14,783. Very shocking number, but I have some even worse statistics for you. When I tried to compare the Cleveland graduation rate that was given on the Black Lives Matter, the SHOP 50 State Report on Public Education and Black Males, which was a national independent report, I compared it to the State of Ohio report. And I looked at Cleveland, and the graduation rate was 54%. So it didn't make sense why this report is saying this number and Cleveland is another, and I actually looked at it for several minutes and was confused. But as I continued to look at the State of Ohio report, it was a big warning or disclaimer saying the state auditor could not validate any of the numbers. It didn't say why, it just said that the state auditor does not necessarily back those numbers. So I went on Google, typed in the year, did a quick search, and found out that Cleveland scrubbed numbers. That for the year that I looked up, 3,500 students disappeared from the numbers that they reported to the state. So that's how they got to the 54%. Continued research said that there is no uniform way of reporting graduation rates for black males nationally. So each district can somehow or find a way to report whatever numbers they want if they report them. And there's once again no national graduation rates. In fact, it's easier to track incarcerated black males and Hispanic males than to find out how many black males graduated. Now, I find that interesting because as school districts transform themselves into districts, as they transform their superintendents into CEOs, as they try to use test scores to make business-like decisions, in the corporate world, don't you measure what matters? If Ford had to do a recall, wouldn't they know exactly how many cars they sold? So if you don't know how many black males are in your school, how do they matter? Once again, you measure what matters. And I obviously don't think these black males matter even in school, so it led me to ask the next statement. The current state of educational disparity should cause one to ask, do black students matter? Not only do black lives matter, do black male students matter? What is happening in our schools that is causing our black males to consistently have the lowest graduation rates at the national, state, and local level? What is going on? Even with all these numbers, even with all this money, what are we doing or not doing? So I want to look at some recent policies. I've come up with 4 recent policies that I feel are contributing to the educational disparities and the black male student. I could have put a dozen or so up here, but the 4 that I came up with, are high-stake assessments, special education, the lack of critical literacy and black studies in our classroom, and the school to prison pipeline that was referred to earlier. I'll have to asterisk by it because you eloquently presented that. So I'll present 3 recent areas very quickly. High-stakes assessment, we all know we need data. We all know that we need to have accountability and transparency, but none of us undermining equity in school quality. It's to the point now where teachers are teaching for the test. Schools are stressful environments over the test. Too much time is being placed on these tests versus subjects that could help maybe allow our students to think critically. Various groups are experiencing problems, not just black males, Native American males, Latino males, and some Asian groups. Every Asian student is not a great student. I want to dispel that myth right now. Chinese and Japanese, yes, because they have dominant economic cultures and America needs them. But if you take a Chinese student and place them in Japan, they don't do good, because Japan once was an oppressor of the Chinese. So we're also noticing that when you take ethnic groups and place them in situations where they're around oppressors, it doesn't work out. Take Vietnamese students or students from Laos or Cambodia, the war-torn Asian countries who are economically doing good, they're not doing good in school. So we have to be careful when we say Asian, because there's more than one type of Asian. What are the social or what are the social educational benefits of these high-stake assessments? Okay, yeah, we're doing accountability, we're learning to teach and learn for the test, but socially, what do I get out of it? Educationally, what do I get out of it? Also, we have to realize some schools are doing whatever it takes to escape test-based mandates, including suspensions and special education, which I'll get to next. This policy It is causing overrepresentation and disproportionality of black students, particularly black males, into these programs. These programs are less rigorous than the overall school learning environment. Special ed students who are in non-inclusive or pullouts may hinder social development, have hindered social development, may be labeled, and reinforcement of a disability occurs even if it's misdiagnosed. And there are lifelong implications of special education, including lower income, lower educational outcomes, incarceration. Reports state that many prisoners have been a part of the special ed program. Michelle Alexander, author of Jim Crow, also mentioned that special education is a strategy for maintaining segregation and racism. Okay. Possible causes, let's take a look at this list. I'm being pressed for time, even though my time is much shorter than everybody else's, but critical literacy. I don't have time to explain this, but I'll post it on the website. Critical literacy would really help in relation to black male disparity. As would black history or black studies, including that in our curriculum would definitely help black males in terms of self-esteem, gaining and understanding their history, ending negative stereotypes, seeing the world is bigger than their neighborhood, and it also will help motivate and develop future black leaders. Solutions. I'm going to quickly go over this. Supports national, state, and local policies and policy makers that recognize and emphasize the following. Mentoring. Mentoring is important to all of our students, especially black males. They need someone to help them realize it's something beyond rap videos and NBA players. Access to college programs such as the LeBron James Family Foundation and Upward Bound. Peer education, mediation, character development. Recognize that there is a social disadvantage from coming from a low-income home. Encourage research that goes into looking into the educational disparities of the black male. We include project-based learning, inquiry-based science, student-centered learning, inclusive multicultural education, critical literacy, anti-oppressive education, all of which were sort of taken away when we began to focus on testing. School safety and bullying. Kids should feel safe coming to school. They shouldn't have to worry about being bullied. We should support politicians who support educators and parent advocacy groups. What happened to the PTA? Redevelop the PTA and go to that school and take your power back. Support policymakers and funding for school counseling and arts, which was lowered or being taken out of our school. Arts education arts in general has such a big importance in the black community that I can't see why it's being taken out, but support politicians who support that plan. Also nutrition and fitness, make sure these boys are eating and make sure there's some kind of fitness program where they are not just sitting around. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to all my slides, so in conclusion, I want to take a few lines from a rapper called King Lo's Call War. It's a real one on our side on the corner. It's a war on your TV screen every morning. Not the war with the bombs and helicopters swarming, but the war for the soul. That's what everyone ignoring. Once again, this war started after Emancipation and it continues now. Thank you. I'm Antonious Bragg. This is my contact information. If you would like this sent to you, take this down. Thank you.
I'm checking with my coworker here on our schedule, and I see those. Are we breaking for lunch? Do they have time for questions? I do want the educators to know, our sister is here. She relinquished her time and she will make her presentation this afternoon. All right. At train and communicate with all our presenters, and maybe even if the presenters eat in this area, maybe you can sneak a couple of questions in as you consider it. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure we don't, everyone be aware that our sister is ready to share her presentation also. So at this time, I believe we're going to be waiting for, I think if I heard you correctly, there could be a couple of questions while they're, if there are a couple of questions, please address them toward the presenters, 1, 2, and 3. Yes.